The smell of diesel and salt had been my constant companion for 18 months. It was the scent of the USS Vela Gulf *, the heavy, metallic perfume of duty and confinement. But now, it was gone. The instant my boots hit the tarmac at Naval Station Norfolk, I felt the familiar, blessed weight lift from my shoulders, the weight of operational readiness, the constant vigilance, the grinding stress of deployment. I was home. Virginia soil had never felt so solid, so welcoming. I didn't linger on base. I completed my checkout procedures with the efficiency expected of a petty officer second class. Grabbed my duffel bag, which felt strangely light now that my mind wasn't carrying the burden of the Atlantic. Got into my old, reliable Ford Ranger. The truck started on the first try. A small, satisfying victory. The drive was a meditation. Every mile marker on I-264, every familiar turn off the highway, brought a wave of profound, exhausted relief. I had earned this quiet. I had earned the right to silence, to privacy, to the small suburban house I had spent years of CPA and careful budgeting acquiring. That house wasn't just for walls and a mortgage. It was my anchor, the physical manifestation of my independence and discipline. It was my sanctuary. I counted the blocks as I drove deeper into the neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns of my neighbors. I gripped the steering wheel, a small, involuntary smile playing on my lips. I pictured the living room, clean, quiet, perhaps a little dusty, exactly as I had left it. Lisa, my younger sister, was supposed to be keeping an eye on things, collecting the mail, maybe running the vacuum once a month. That was the extent of the arrangement. A favor, not a tenancy. But as I rounded the final corner and my house came into view, the smile evaporated. A cold, heavy knot formed instantly in my stomach, pulling my relief down into a pit of simmering dread. ***, 1.2, the visual betrayal, ***. This was not the house I had left. The lawn, which I meticulously kept trimmed before deployment, was a riot of unchecked growth. The grass was knee-high in patches, interspersed with thickets of dandelions and crabgrass. It looked less like a temporary oversight and more like a declaration of war against basic maintenance. My driveway was the next offense. It was cracked and stained, and parked diagonally across the access point was a rusted-out, faded blue sedan that looked like it hadn't passed inspection in a decade. It wasn't just parked badly. It was parked aggressively, blocking any chance of me pulling my own truck into my own garage. I swore under my breath, the first sharp expletive escaping my lips since I stepped off the ship. Disrespect. That was the immediate, visceral feeling. I pulled the Ranger to the curb, killed the engine, and just stared. The porch, my neat, small entryway, was stacked high with mismatched cheap furniture, broken plastic patio chair, a stained cooler, and a few cardboard boxes that looked damp and ready to collapse. Scattered around this junk pile were cheap, brightly colored plastic toys, the kind that squeak when stepped on. I didn't recognize them, and I certainly didn't own them. This wasn't neglect. This was colonization. I got out of the truck, the stiffness in my joints forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I walked up the cracked walkway, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder. The air here smelled stale and faintly sweet. A mixture of cheap cigarette smoke and something frying in old grease, definitely not the clean, salt-tinged air of my neighborhood. I reached the front steps and located the stone Noma hideous ceramic garden accessory that Lisa had given me, ironically, years ago. I reached underneath its cracked base and felt the familiar, cool metal of the spare key. Only Lisa and I knew that spot. I retrieved the key, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of containing the rising tide of anger. I jammed the key into the lock. It clicked, but the deadbolt was already thrown from the inside. I hesitated. I could knock, but my training dictated that I needed to observe and assess the full scope of the breach before initiating contact. I twisted the doorknob and pushed. The door opened just enough for me to slip inside. ***, 1.3, the unwanted guests, ***. The moment I crossed the threshold, the assault on my senses intensified. The air inside was thick, stagnant, and heavy with the odor of stale beer, old pizza, and cheap, chemical air freshener, trying desperately and failing to mask the rot. The living room was unrecognizable. My beige carpet, which I had shampooed professionally before leaving, was now sticky under my boots. There were dark, unidentifiable stains everywhere. My minimalist furniture arrangement had been obliterated. Overflowing ashtrays sat precariously on every surface, competing for space with half-eaten plates of food and stacks of poorly folded laundry. A television, far too large and loud for the space, was blaring some reality show. The music was a relentless, tinny bass beat that vibrated through the floorboards. My focus immediately snapped to the couch. There she was, Lisa. She was reclined against a pile of mismatched cushions, scrolling intently on her phone. She hadn't heard me over the noise. I watched her for a beat, absorbing the betrayal. She looked different, a little heavier, a lot more careless. I dropped my duffel bag deliberately. The heavy thud cut through the noise. Lisa jumped, dropping her phone on the floor. Her head snapped up, and her eyes, wide with shock, met mine. The shock quickly curdled into something defensive and immediately hostile. There was no flicker of relief, no familial warmth, only the look of a trespasser caught mid-theft. "Sarah," she gasped, scrambling to sit up. Before I could speak, a large, unshaven man emerged from the kitchen doorway, wiping his greasy hands on a stained t-shirt. He was massive, his gaze slow and calculating as he took me in my uniform, my short hair, the rigid posture that screamed unwelcome authority. He glared at me, his presence an immediate, silent threat. "Who the hell is this?" He grunted at Lisa, his voice gravelly. Lisa waved a dismissive hand toward me, as if I were a solicitor trying to sell vacuum cleaners. "It's just my sister, Sarah. The one who was ... deployed." She emphasized the word deployed with a sneer, turning my professional commitment into an act of abandonment. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't offer an apology for the state of the house. She simply introduced the man dismissively. "This is Mark." Mark didn't offer his hand. He just stood there, arms crossed, effectively blocking the entrance to the kitchen, radiating proprietary aggression. I didn't acknowledge him. My focus was solely on Lisa. I could feel the heat rising in my face. But years of military training of maintaining composure under duress kicked in. I consciously lowered my heart rate and regulated my breathing. This was a situation that required a systematic approach, not an emotional explosion. I took one slow step forward, planting myself firmly in the middle of what used to be my clean entryway. Asterisk 1.4, the immediate ultimatum. Asterisk, I looked directly at Lisa, ignoring Mark's intimidating posture. My voice, when it came out, was level, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used when briefing a watch team on emergency procedures. "Lisa," I began, the sound carrying easily despite the television, which I instinctively reached out and silenced with the remote I spotted on a nearby table. The sudden quiet was deafening, amplifying the tension. "My deployment is finished." I returned ahead of schedule. I gestured around the room, taking in the sticky floors, the overflowing trash, the absolute chaos that had replaced my home. The arrangement we had was temporary. You were to watch the house, collect the mail, and ensure basic maintenance. You were not granted tenancy. You were certainly not authorized to move in guests or alter the condition of the property to this degree. Lisa opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand, stopping her cold. I wasn't asking. I was stating facts and delivering orders. "The temporary arrangement is over," I repeated, my gaze unwavering. "You have exactly 1 week, 7 days, to clear your belongings, arrange for alternative living accommodations for yourself and Mark, and vacate the premises." My words hung heavy in the stale air. I watched her face contort, the initial surprise fading into a familiar, self-pitying rage. She looked ready to argue, ready to cry, ready to manipulate. I cut off the possibility of negotiation before she could even formulate a defense. "This is not a discussion, Lisa," I finished, my voice dropping slightly, making the finality unmistakable. "This is non-negotiable. I need my house back." I stood there, waiting for the inevitable eruption, watching my sister transform from a startled squatter into an entitled aggressor. I knew, with sickening certainty, that this was going to be a battle. But I was ready. I had survived 18 months on the high seas. I was not about to be defeated by a messy living room and a deadbeat boyfriend. This was my home, and I was prepared to fight for every square inch of the sanctuary I had earned. The silence that followed my ultimatum: "You have 1 week to clear your belongings and vacate the premises. This is non-negotiable," was not a silence of contemplation, but the suffocating calm before a Category 5 hurricane. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely at my sides, my posture mirroring the rigid expectation of a command deck. I was Petty Officer Jensen, not Sarah, the younger sister. I was waiting for the inevitable eruption. It came not as a reasoned plea, but as a shriek, high-pitched and laced with manufactured offense. Chapter 2. the squatter insult number #2. 1. The eruption. Lisa didn't just speak. She launched herself off the couch, sending a cloud of dust and stray potato chip crumbs into the stale air. Her face was already blotchy red, not from shame, but from instantaneous, self-righteous indignation. 1 week, asterisk, 1 week, asterisk. She bellowed, stomping her foot hard enough to rattle the cheap plastic toys scattered around the coffee table, toys that definitely weren't mine. Where have you been, Sarah? You think you can just abandon this house for 2 years and then waltz back in like some conquering hero? This is asterisk my asterisk home now. You don't get to just walk back in and issue orders. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. Abandoned. I had been deployed, serving the country she claimed to respect only when it suited her political rants. I had been in the unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, working 18-hour days in conditions that would make her weep, all while sending a large portion of my meager combat pay home to cover the mortgage on this very house she was currently defiling. I didn't abandon the house, Lisa, I replied, my voice dangerously low, stripped of emotion. I was deployed. My service is the reason this house is paid for. You were here temporarily, as a house sitter, not a resident. Mark, the unshaven boyfriend, finally stirred, rising slowly from the couch like a sluggish bear. He crossed his arms over a stained t-shirt, attempting to look intimidating. His presence only amplified my disgust. Listen to your sister, Lady Mark drawled, his voice thick and slow, smelling faintly of stale beer and cigarettes. She's been keeping this place together. You were gone. Out of sight, out of mind, right? She's got rights. The sheer audacity of his statement that she, the unemployed, perpetually indebted sister, was keeping my house together, while simultaneously turning it into a biohazard was almost comical. But the underlying malice was not. Mark, I addressed him directly, my eyes boring into his. You are not an owner, a tenant, or a guest. You are trespassing on private property. I suggest you remain silent. Lisa's rage intensified, fueled by her need to defend her useless boyfriend and her collapsing narrative. She started screaming about how I was always the selfish one, the good little soldier who cared more about rank and rules than family. She twisted the truth into a grotesque parody, claiming I had left her stranded and that she had been forced to take over the burden of maintaining the property. I had to live here, she wailed, throwing her hands up dramatically. I had nowhere else to go. And now you want to throw me on the street after everything I've done. I stared at the overflowing trash cans, the sticky substance coating the wood floor, and the layers of grime on the windows. Asterisk everything she had done, asterisk was destroy 18 months of my equity and peace of mind. But I refused to engage in the emotional mud wrestling she craved. My training mandated systematic response to chaos, not participation in it. #2. To the fake claim, just when I thought the theatrics couldn't escalate further, Lisa reached into the pocket of her ripped jeans and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It looked like it had been folded and unfolded a dozen times, the edges softened by sweat and manipulation. Oh yeah, she challenged, her eyes gleaming with a manic, desperate conviction. Well, guess what, petty officer, perfect. I'm protected now. I know my rights. She slapped the paper onto the sticky surface of the coffee table with a flourish that was meant to be dramatic, but only achieved pathetic. I established residency, she announced, puffing out her chest. I've been here for months. You can't just kick me out. I'm a tenant, and I have rights. I moved forward swiftly, my motion precise and economical, ignoring her flinch. I snatched the paper, pulling it taut to examine the amateurish typography. It was a flimsy, self-made document, clearly printed from some questionable online forum, likely something titled, How to Squat Legally or Eviction Defense for Dummies. The title, printed in an overly large, aggressive font, read, Notice of Continued Tenancy and Adverse Possession Claim. The language was a nonsensical jumble of misused legal terms. De facto occupancy, uninterrupted tenure, and implied lease. It was garbage, legally worthless, but its intent was a clear declaration of war. She wasn't just lazy. She was actively attempting fraud. I barely needed to read the body text to understand the scope of her delusion. She had signed it herself, and Mark had scribbled his name as a witness. The whole thing was a bad joke. But the cold realization hit me. She genuinely believed this scrap of paper, this cheap lie, was her shield. This is not a legal document, Lisa, I stated, dropping the paper back onto the table as if it were contaminated. This is trash. You have no lease, you pay no rent, and and you have documented proof of neither. You are a licensee whose permission to stay has been revoked. That's the legal reality. She didn't hear me. She was too focused on her performance, her desperation morphing into true malice. Number 2. 3. The defining insult. It was the moment she realized her paper shield was useless, that she resorted to the ultimate personal attack. Her face contorted into a sneer of pure, venomous resentment. She pointed a trembling, accusation finger directly at my chest, where the uniform I had just removed would have proudly displayed my rank and service ribbons. You know what, Sarah? She spat out the name as if it tasted foul. You're the problem. You are. You ran off. You abandoned your family and your responsibilities. You don't belong here anymore. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper that still carried across the chaotic living room. You're the squatter here, Sarah. Get out of my house before I call the police on you for harassment. The word squatter hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an insult. It was the ultimate betrayal, a calculated attempt to invalidate my entire identity, my sacrifice, and my ownership. She was taking the moral high ground, using my duty as a weapon against me, claiming the very structure I had paid for, fought for, and dreamed of returning to. A searing heat rushed up the back of my neck, and for the first time since I stepped off the plane, my professional composure faltered. I felt the familiar, dangerous surge of cold fury. My hands tightened into fists, and I had to physically restrain myself from engaging in the brawl she was clearly hoping for. She wanted the spectacle, the meltdown, the evidence that I was just as volatile and irrational as she was. But years of military discipline are not easily discarded. I closed my eyes for a microsecond, took a deep, controlled breath, a tactical pause, and let the fury settle into a cold, hard resolve. I would not give her the satisfaction of a verbal fight. She had crossed the line from annoying relative to legal adversary. The rules of engagement had changed. I realized then that this was no longer a messy family argument that could be solved with stern words or emotional appeal. This was an operation. And operations require protocol. ### 2.4 Activating the protocol. I opened my eyes, and all trace of emotion was gone. My face was a mask of cold, surgical detachment. I looked past Lisa, past Mark, and surveyed the wreckage of the living room one last time. I catalogued the overflowing ashtrays, the sticky floor, the unauthorized, rusted sedan blocking my driveway. This was evidence. I refused to utter another word. She was screaming something about property rights and calling her lawyer, but the noise was just background static to me now. My mind was already calculating the logistics, securing a temporary base of operations, contacting legal counsel, and documenting the scene. I turned my back on the chaos. It felt like walking away from a live grenade, but it was the only path to victory. I walked deliberately toward the front door, reaching out and grasping the knob. Lisa, seeing me retreat, mistook my discipline for defeat. "Yeah, that's right," she shrieked triumphantly. "Go cry to Mommy, Sarah, you lost." I ignored her. I stepped outside, into the relatively clean air of the porch, and pulled the door shut firmly behind me. I heard the lock click, my lock, the one I had paid for. I paused just long enough to ensure the deadbolt was engaged, confirming that for the moment, I still held the physical key to my own property. I walked down the overgrown steps, past the pathetic stone gnome that once marked our secret key spot, and headed straight for my truck. My boots crunched on the gravel, a satisfyingly solid sound in contrast to the shrieking hysteria coming from inside the house. Mark had parked his derelict sedan diagonally, forcing me to execute a precise, three-point turn to extricate my vehicle. The minor inconvenience only solidified my resolve. Every detail of their disrespect would be factored into the final cost. I drove away from the site of my defiled sanctuary, not toward a friend or a relative, but toward the nearest major commercial intersection. The Navy had instilled in me the necessity of a secure, neutral base of operations when facing a critical mission. I needed quiet, professional isolation. I pulled into a chain hotel parking lot, clean, anonymous, and far removed from the emotional toxicity of my sister. I checked in using my government ID, paying for a week up front, and went straight to the room. The sterile carpet and the crisp, white sheets felt like a blessed relief after the filth I had just witnessed. I didn't unpack. I didn't sit down. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the Defense Switched Network DSN number for the Legal Services Office, LSO on base. The rules of engagement had been activated. When the duty officer answered, I didn't waste time on pleasantries or emotional backstory. "This is Petty Officer Jensen, Sarah, U.S. NID number redacted," I stated clearly, my voice regaining its professional cadence. I have just returned from deployment. My dependent sister, Lisa Jensen, is occupying my primary residence in violation of our temporary agreement. She is claiming tenancy and has refused to vacate. I require immediate legal counsel regarding eviction proceedings and potential civil action for property damage and fraudulent occupancy. The officer's response was immediate and professional. He took down my details, confirmed my status, and assured me that Commander Hayes, the lead counsel for housing disputes, would be in contact within the hour. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the impersonal hotel room. The cold fury had settled into a steady, motivating engine. Lisa had tried to shame me, tried to invalidate my ownership, and tried to weaponize my service against me. She had called me a squatter in my own home. She had played the family card, but I was done with sentimentality. She had forced my hand. This was no longer about sisterly forgiveness, it was about systematic justice, and I intended to prosecute the case with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to every mission the Navy assigned me. The battle was officially underway. She wanted to fight dirty. I would fight with the full, uncompromising weight of the law. The antiseptic scent of the Naval Legal Services office was a stark contrast to the stench of stale cigarette smoke and cheap takeout that still clung to my nostrils. I felt the anxiety draining away, replaced by the familiar rigidity of military protocol. I was no longer the betrayed sister. I was Petty Officer Jensen reporting a critical security breach of my personal assets. I sat across from Commander Hayes, a woman whose sharp, intelligent eyes suggested she had seen every variety of domestic chaos the Navy could produce. Her office was immaculate, the desk clear, save for a single notepad and a pen. I laid out the situation with the precision I would use describing a hostile contact, no emotion. Just data points. 18 months deployed. Commander, I left my sister Lisa in the house under a gratuitous tenancy agreement. Explicitly temporary. My return was known. Upon entry, I found the property defiled, and she refused to vacate. She is now claiming adverse possession and has verbally declared me the trespasser. Commander Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making a swift, precise note. When I finished, the silence was heavy, but not judgmental. It was the silence of a professional assessing an operational risk. Petty Officer Jensen, she said, her voice calm and measured. Your sister's claim of adverse possession is legally laughable in this context, especially given the documented temporary nature of her stay and your continuous financial responsibility. But we cannot rely on logic alone. We rely on documentation. We treat this as a mission briefing. We need to secure the objective systematically. The relief that washed over me was profound. She wasn't asking how I felt, or why my sister would do this. She was asking for the coordinates of the target. We need 3 things. Petty Officer, she continued, holding up 3 fingers. 1. Irrefutable proof of ownership and financial liability. 2. Documentation of the original temporary arrangement texts, emails, or written agreements. 3. Evidence of her current status as a non-tenant, which you've already established by the simple fact that you pay the mortgage and utilities. I confirmed that I had the original text messages outlining the agreement, saved and backed up before deployment. I had the digital copies of the mortgage and deed stored securely in my cloud drive. Excellent, Commander Hayes affirmed, her lips curving into a tight, professional smile. We will draft the formal notice to quit immediately, backed by our office. But you need to spend the next 48 hours compiling the rest of the dossier. Every bill, every payment, every tax statement tied to that house. We need an overwhelming paper trail that leaves 0 room for theatrical interpretation in court. I left the JAG office feeling energized. The wounded anger transformed into cold, focused determination. Lisa wanted a war of emotion. I was going to deliver a war of attrition, fought entirely with ink and paper. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. My new operational headquarters was a sterile, beige hotel room near the base perimeter. It was impersonal and quiet, the perfect environment for systematic data collection. I set up my laptop on the small, bolted-down desk, the screen glowing late into the night. The process of gathering the evidence was tedious, yet intensely satisfying. Each document, I pulled up the original closing statement from 5 years ago. The mortgage payment receipts stamped with my name. The homeowner's insurance policy I renewed religiously every year was a small, silent victory. They were physical manifestations of the sacrifice I had made, the long hours I had worked, and the dedication I had poured into creating that sanctuary. Lisa's name appeared nowhere. Not on the water bill, not on the electricity account, and certainly not on the deed. I organized the documents into a heavy, 3-ring binder, labeling the tabs with military precision. asterisk tab A, title and deed asterisk tab B, mortgage liabilities asterisk tab C, financial responsibility, utilities taxes asterisk tab D, communication log original agreement asterisk. I treated the binder like a classified mission report. There could be no ambiguity, no gaps in the timeline. Every page was secured in a plastic sleeve. The sheer volume of my proof against her utter lack of it was staggering. As I compiled the utility statements, I felt a renewed surge of betrayal. I had diligently set up autopay for every single bill before deployment, ensuring Lisa wouldn't have to worry about a thing while I was overseas. I saw the massive spikes in the electric and water usage over the last 6 months, far exceeding what a single, unemployed adult should be consuming. The audacity of her entitlement was breathtaking. She hadn't just been living there. She had been living extravagantly, knowing I was footing the entire bill while serving thousands of miles away. The paper trail was irrefutable. I was the owner, the payer, the responsible party. She was, legally speaking, an unauthorized guest who had overstayed her welcome. Asterisk, 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 the discovery of the financial fraud required a deeper dive. While reviewing my bank statements for the purposes of the lawsuit, Commander Hayes insisted we sue for every cent of utility usage and any potential damages. I noted something odd. Lisa was unemployed, yet there were regular, sizable deposits into my linked account deposits that were not coming from family or government aid. They were consistent and recurring, labeled vaguely as cash deposit. My gut tightened. I knew what this meant, but I needed confirmation. This wasn't just about eviction anymore. This was about monetizing my property without authorization. This was theft. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who lived across the street. Mrs. Henderson was sharp, discreet, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of everything that happened on our block. "Mrs. Henderson, it's Sarah. I'm back. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice, usually cheerful, dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Sarah, dear, I'm so glad you're home. The neighborhood hasn't been the same. I've been meaning to call you, ... I cut to the chase, keeping my voice low and controlled. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you about Lisa. Did you notice any unusual activity at the house while I was gone? Specifically, any new faces? Or anyone staying in the spare bedroom?" There was a slight pause on the line, followed by a sigh of relief, as if she was finally allowed to speak the truth. "Oh, yes, dear. That's been going on for months. She's been renting out that room. Sarah, a young man, early 20s, drives that noisy sedan. He pays her cash every week. She told me she needed the money for rent because you weren't sending her enough." The blood ran cold in my veins. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it. She had turned my home into a source of illegal income, pocketing rent money while simultaneously forcing me to pay the mortgage, insurance, and utilities. She wasn't just a squatter. She was a criminal enterprise operating out of my living room. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," I managed, my voice clipped. "That information is vital. I appreciate your honesty." I hung up, staring at the bank statements on the screen. The vague cash deposit now had a face and a motive. The civil suit was no longer a formality. It was a moral imperative. Lisa needed to face the full consequences of her actions. She had not only betrayed our sisterly bond but had actively committed financial fraud against me while I was serving my country. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The final element of the preparation was the most emotionally taxing, dealing with the collateral damage. As soon as Lisa realized the professional weight of the Navy JAG office was behind me, she must have received the initial notice to quit. She didn't retreat. She escalated. She launched a vicious smear campaign on social media, twisting the narrative into a Dickensian tragedy. Photos of her looking tearful were posted alongside captions about the heartless, wealthy veteran throwing her poor, struggling sister onto the streets. She painted me as greedy, unforgiving, and cold. The phone calls started immediately. My mother, our aunt, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The messages were universally the same: guilt-tripping, soft-spoken accusations of cruelty, and appeals to family. "Sarah, she's your blood. Can't you just let her stay until she gets on her feet?" my mother pleaded, her voice thick with manufactured distress. "She's been on her feet for 30 years. Mom," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion she was trying to manipulate. "She's not asking for help. She's demanding my home and monetizing my sacrifice. She called me a squatter in the house I paid for. I am done with sentimentality." My aunt tried the same line. "Family means forgiveness, Sarah. The Navy changed you. You're too hard. No, Aunt Carol. The Navy taught me that loyalty is a two-way street, and respect is earned. Lisa violated both. She stole from me and then tried to weaponize my service against me. She chose this path, and now she must face the consequences. I realized that the family members who were siding with Lisa were not concerned with justice. They were concerned with their own comfort and avoiding messy conflict. They preferred the narrative where the successful, disciplined sister simply absorbs the burden of the entitled sister. I made the difficult, but necessary, decision to isolate myself. I blocked the numbers of everyone who attempted to guilt-trip me. I disabled my social media accounts entirely. This wasn't weakness. It was strategic focus. I needed to maintain operational security and mental clarity. Every ounce of my energy had to be directed toward the objective. Lisa had drawn a line in the sand, and by trying to turn the family against me, she had only solidified my resolve. I was Petty Officer Jensen. I had a mission, a dossier full of irrefutable evidence, and the full backing of the law. I had shed the last vestige of emotional attachment to the situation. My objective was clear: secure the asset and ensure accountability for the breach. The waiting was agonizing, but the evidence was gathered, the strategy was set, and the execution phase was imminent. I looked at the binder sitting on the desk, feeling a quiet, cold power. Lisa had no idea what she had unleashed. She thought she was fighting her sister. She was about to face the uncompromising efficiency of a trained military professional. Chapter 4. The Execution of Justice Number 4. 1. The waiting game, the sterile quiet of the hotel room, was a poor substitute for the familiar rhythmic hum of a ship's engine, but I forced myself to treat it like a staging area. My entire existence had been reduced to the confines of this temporary space and the contents of a single, heavy binder. My focus, honed by years of operational readiness, was now entirely fixated on the clock. The legal process, I quickly learned, was agonizingly slow compared to the rapid deployment cycles I was used to. Every hour that ticked by felt like a calculated delay. Another moment Lisa was allowed to pollute my sanctuary. Commander Hayes had assured me that the paperwork was flawless. The eviction notice, based on irrefutable evidence of ownership and the documented breach of the temporary agreement, had been served. Simultaneously, the civil suit, the one designed to recover the stolen rent and the utility costs, was officially filed. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the precedent. I cared about ensuring that entitlement, when directed at me, resulted in systematic, painful accountability. The agonizing wait demanded discipline. I spent the morning meticulously cleaning my dress uniform. The crisp lines of the collar, the polished shine of the brass buttons, the precise crease of the trousers, each detail was a rejection of the sloppiness I knew existed inside my house. I wasn't going to meet Lisa looking emotionally ravaged. I was going to meet her looking like the institution she had tried to defraud. My uniform was armor, a visible declaration that I was not just Sarah, the sister, but Petty Officer Jensen, the asset owner, backed by a legal machine. I ran through the scenario in my head constantly, treating the eviction like a mission briefing. Objective: secure the premises. Potential obstacles: emotional outburst, physical resistance, legal bluster. Protocol: remain silent, defer to law enforcement. Present evidence only when requested. I knew Lisa would try to pull me into a screaming match, but I had already decided I would not speak a single unnecessary word to her. She had forfeited the right to a conversation the moment she called me a squatter. The tension manifested physically: a dull, constant ache behind my eyes and a jaw so tightly clenched I could feel the grind of my molars. I hadn't slept properly since I had arrived, but adrenaline provided a sharp, cold clarity. I repeatedly checked the binder: mortgage deeds, bank statements, the notarized utility payment records, the email exchange confirming the temporary nature of her stay. Everything was redundant, organized, and ready to deploy. This was not a negotiation. It was an enforcement action. Finally, the call came from Commander Hayes' assistant, Petty Officer Jensen. "We are mobilizing. Meet us at the house in 30 minutes. The confirmation was a sudden, sharp release of pressure, replaced immediately by a surge of focused energy. I snapped the binder shut, grabbed my keys, and walked out, leaving the hotel room exactly as I had found it: neat, orderly, and entirely impersonal. 4.2. The arrival. The drive felt simultaneously too long and too short. As I rounded the familiar corner, the sight of my house, still marred by the neglected lawn and the rusted sedan, ignited a fresh spark of cold fury. But this time, something was different. Parked directly in front of my driveway were two official vehicles: a sleek, unmarked government sedan belonging to Commander Hayes, and a clearly marked Sheriff's Department patrol car. I pulled my truck to the curb and killed the engine. The sound of the diesel cut out, leaving a profound silence that seemed to swallow the suburban noise. I stepped out, adjusting the cuff of my uniform jacket, forcing my posture into parade rest perfection. Commander Hayes, a woman whose professional demeanor was as sharp as her legal mind, was already waiting on the sidewalk. Beside her stood the deputy. Officer Reynolds was tall, imposing, and completely devoid of visible emotion. Her uniform was immaculate, her face set in an expression of detached professionalism. The weight of her gear and the authority radiating from her presence immediately shifted the balance of power. I approached them, offering a crisp nod. "Commander Hayes." "Officer Reynolds." "Petty Officer Jensen," Hayes responded, her voice low and steady. "Everything is in order. We have the eviction order, the proof of ownership, and the documentation confirming the fraudulent activity. Officer Reynolds is here to ensure the order is executed peacefully and legally." Officer Reynolds merely looked me up and down, her gaze assessing my uniform and my composure. "I need you to remain calm, Petty Officer. I handled the confrontation. You are here solely to identify yourself as the owner and confirm the boundaries of the property." "Understood," I replied, my voice steady. I felt a powerful sense of validation. I wasn't fighting this alone anymore. I was utilizing the system I served. We walked up the driveway together, the crunch of our combined footsteps, a deputy's heavy boots, Hayes' dress shoes, and my own polished military low-cuts sounded like a unified march. I carried the binder tucked securely under my arm. It felt less like a collection of papers and more like a tactical weapon. As we reached the porch, I noticed the cheap, mismatched furniture Lisa had stacked there. The air smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and some sickly sweet, cheap air freshener. This was not the home I had left. It was a squat, a temporary refuge for people who had no respect for earned assets. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my own Keitha original uncopied key. I inserted it into the lock and turned it. The click of the tumbler was loud. Final. I pushed the door inward. # 4.3. The final confrontation, the interior of the house hit me with a blast of cacophony and disarray. Loud, tinny music was vibrating through cheap speakers, and the living room was even worse than I remembered. A pile of dirty dishes sat on the coffee table next to an overflowing ashtray. Lisa and Mark were immediately visible. They were lounging on my sofa, watching a daytime talk show. When the door opened and they saw me, followed by the formidable figure of Officer Reynolds, the music seemed to instantly drop out, replaced by a stunned, total silence. Mark, the unshaven boyfriend, was the first to react, scrambling to his feet. His initial expression was aggressive, fueled by misplaced entitlement. "Hey, who the hell are you? Get out of here." Officer Reynolds didn't raise her voice, but her tone was absolute authority. She stepped fully into the room, her presence dominating the cluttered space. "Sir, calm down. I am Officer Reynolds, Sheriff's Department. Petty Officer Jensen is the registered owner of this property. We are here to enforce a legally executed eviction order." Lisa's face went through a rapid transformation. Shock, denial, and then the instant deployment of her favorite weapon, the theatrical victimhood. She leaped up, pointing wildly at me. "Sarah, how dare you? You brought the police to your own sister's house. After all I've done for you." Her voice was shrill, desperate, and utterly fake. I remained rooted just inside the doorway, my expression fixed, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I let Officer Reynolds feel the chaos. "Ma'am, your relationship to the owner is irrelevant to this legal proceeding," the deputy stated plainly. "You have been served a notice to vacate. Your temporary right to occupy this dwelling is terminated. You need to gather essential items and exit the premises immediately." Lisa tried to circle the deputy, attempting to appeal directly to me. "Sarah, please, you can't do this. I live here. I established residency. Mark and I are protected." Mark, regaining some of his bluster, stepped forward. "Yeah, we got rights. You can't just kick us out. We got a paper." Hayes stepped forward subtly, positioning herself between Mark and the deputy. "Sir, any paper you may possess is superseded by the recorded deed and the court order executed this morning. Petty Officer Jensen has provided comprehensive documentation of ownership and financial responsibility." Lisa, realizing the deputy was immune to tears, turned her full, venomous attention back to me. "You heartless bitch. You come back from playing soldier and think you can destroy my life. We're family, Sarah. Where is your loyalty?" I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but I refused to let it show. I kept my gaze level, cold, and unwavering. I didn't owe her loyalty. I owed her justice. Your game is over, Lisa, I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the noise. It was the only sentence I intended to speak to her. Number 4. For the irrefutable proof, Lisa lunged toward the deputy, pulling out the crumpled, flimsy document she had shown me days earlier, her self-made notice of continued tenancy. It was pathetic, clearly printed from some dubious internet source, and utterly meaningless. Look at this. I have rights. She abandoned the house. I took care of it. She shrieked, shoving the paper toward Officer Reynolds. The deputy took the paper, glanced at it for half a second, and then handed it back with a look of extreme dismissal. This document has no legal standing, ma'am. It is not filed with the court, nor is it signed by the property owner. It is irrelevant. Hayes stepped forward, opening the binder with a decisive *snap*. She didn't need to argue. She just needed to present facts. She flipped to the first tab, revealing the digitized copy of the mortgage deed, clearly showing my name as the sole legal owner, Officer Reynolds. On page 1, you have the full recorded deed. Page 2 contains the original closing statement. Pages 3 through 5 contain the utility and property tax payment records, all solely in Petty Officer Jensen's name, covering the entire period of her deployment. Hayes' voice was efficient, like a drill sergeant running a checklist. Lisa watched this display of overwhelming, organized proof, and her bravado finally shattered. The color drained from her face, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. She realized she wasn't arguing with her sister anymore. She was arguing with a system that demands proof, and her proof was a lie. Mark tried one last pathetic attempt at defiance. She can't prove we didn't pay her. Hayes flipped the binder open to the section detailing the fraudulent activity. We have documentation, sir. Petty Officer Jensen's neighbor confirmed that Ms. Jensen was illegally subletting the spare bedroom for cash, monetizing the owner's asset without consent. That constitutes theft and further violates the terms of the temporary agreement. We have bank records showing the recurring deposits. The deputy's eyes narrowed as she absorbed the gravity of the fraud. She looked at Lisa, and the last vestige of patience evaporated. Ms. Jensen, this is no longer a civil dispute about tenancy. You are facing potential criminal charges for fraud and theft. You have 5 minutes to gather essential personal items, medication, identification, wallets. Anything else must be legally removed later. If you are not out the door in 5 minutes, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and trespassing. The threat was real, delivered with the cold authority of the badge. Lisa's attempts at tears turned into genuine, ugly sobs of defeat. She looked at me one last time, her eyes burning with hatred, but her mouth remained shut. She had nothing left to say that the law hadn't already refuted. I stood silent, watching her scramble. I watched her entitlement crumble under the weight of my meticulous organization. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the uncompromising enforcement of boundaries. I had earned this house, and I was taking it back, systematically, legally, and definitively. The battle was won not with shouting, but with paperwork. The silence I maintained was the loudest statement I could have made. Justice, I realized, was simply the cold application of truth. Chapter 5. Reclaiming my sanctuary, 5.1, the eviction enforced. The air crackled with a tension so thick I could almost taste the metallic flavor of impending resolution. I stood silent, flanked by the unwavering authority of Officer Reynolds and the cool, professional support of Commander Hayes. The moment Lisa realized the deputy was not going to be swayed by theatrics, that the uniform and the badge meant absolute, uncompromising law, her theatrical bravado collapsed into a pathetic, whimpering mess. I watched her frantic movements, the way she snatched at plastic bins and mismatched bags, her eyes darting between me and the deputy. Her boyfriend, Mark, who had been so loud and imposing just days ago, now looked like a deflated balloon, shuffling awkwardly and avoiding eye contact. He knew, just as Lisa now knew, that they had fatally miscalculated. They had confused my absence with weakness, and my discipline with concession. Officer Reynolds was a marvel of efficiency. She didn't raise her voice, but every word she spoke carried the weight of the state. You have 30 minutes to gather essential personal items only. Anything left behind will be inventoried and placed in storage at your expense. Lisa tried one last, desperate ploy, turning her tear-streaked face toward me. Sarah, please. We're family. You can't do this to me. I felt nothing. The emotional reservoir had run dry days ago, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a mission objective. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply held my gaze steady, allowing the silence to deliver the final verdict. I was not her sister in that moment. I was the owner, the petty officer, the claimant demanding justice. As Mark wrestled a broken television through the front door, Lisa paused on the threshold. She looked back at me, her face contorted in a final, ugly spasm of resentment. You think you've won, Sarah? You're just a cold, heartless bitch who cares more about paper than people. The insult landed with the force of a feather. It lacked the searing power of her earlier accusations because she was defeated, stripped of her assumed power. I simply inclined my head, a gesture that conveyed, your opinion is irrelevant. Officer Reynolds stepped forward, her hand resting near her belt. That's enough, ma'am. Move along. Watching them retreat down my driveway, lugging their cheap possessions toward that rusted-out sedan, felt like watching toxic waste being cleared from a sensitive environment. The sight of Mark struggling to fit their junk into the trunk, with Lisa weeping dramatically on the curb, was the ultimate, undeniable vindication. They were trespassers, exposed and expelled. Officer Reynolds returned, carrying the final paperwork. She supervised the locksmith, who arrived promptly and began the satisfying metallic ritual of replacing the tumbler sets. The old keys, the ones Lisa still possessed, the ones that had allowed her to invade my sanctuary, were rendered useless. Petty Officer Jensen, the deputy said, handing me a signed copy of the eviction confirmation. The premises are secured. They are officially trespassing if they attempt to return. Call us immediately if they do. I shook her hand, my grip firm. Thank you, officer. Your professionalism is appreciated. The moment the deputy and Commander Hayes stepped back to their vehicles, leaving me alone on the porch, a wave of dizzying relief washed over me. The house was mine again. The air, though still stale inside, felt lighter already. I had executed the plan perfectly. The system, the structured, impersonal system I had relied upon, had delivered. Number 5.2, the legal aftermath. I turned to Commander Hayes, who was tucking his legal folder neatly under his arm. The job was not finished, but the immediate crisis was averted. Commander, what is the next phase for the civil suit? I asked, my voice returning to its normal, controlled register. The transition from homeowner under siege to methodical client was seamless. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. The unlawful detainer action is complete, Petty Officer. They are out. Now, we focus on accountability. We filed the civil suit yesterday to recover the illegal rental income, the unpaid utilities, and the damages to the property. We have overwhelming proof, thanks to your meticulous financial records. I confirmed my objective. It's not about making a profit, Commander. It's about ensuring there is a financial consequence for theft and fraud. Lisa needs to understand that actions have tangible, painful repercussions when she violates boundaries. Understood. We will pursue the maximum allowed under Virginia law. We have the neighbor's testimony regarding the subletting. We have your utility bills. And we will now conduct a full inventory of the damages. Expect this process to take several months, but your case is extremely strong. She admitted to collecting rent and claiming residency without any legal standing. That self-made tenancy notice she showed you, that was the most damning piece of evidence against her intent. I felt a surge of gratitude for the training that had conditioned me to document everything. The digitized tenancy agreement, the utility payments, the mortgage statements, they were my weapons. Far more effective than any shouting match. We spent another hour reviewing the preliminary damage assessment. I pointed out the excessive wear on the carpets, the cigarette burns and the cheap furniture she had brought in, and the general accumulation of filth. Every ruined corner represented a deliberate disrespect for my labor. We will include an estimate for deep cleaning and necessary repairs in the suit, Commander Hayes assured me. The key takeaway, Petty Officer, is that you handled this perfectly. You did not engage in self-help. You immediately sought legal counsel. That's what prevented this from becoming a messy, drawn-out affair. I appreciated the validation. My military career had taught me that adherence to protocol always beats emotional impulse. Lisa wanted a drama. I gave her a court filing. As Commander Hayes prepared to leave, I reflected on the painful family schism. I had received 3 more guilt-laden messages from my aunt, claiming I had ruined Lisa's life. Commander, I said, looking out at the now empty driveway, my family is attempting to interfere, claiming I should forgive her because she's my sister. Does this have any legal bearing? He shook his head firmly. Absolutely none. This is a property dispute and a case of fraud. Your relationship to the defendant is irrelevant to the facts of ownership and financial liability. Maintain the boundaries you've established. Focus on the facts. That was the clarity I needed. I had paid the price of betrayal, And now Lisa would pay the price of accountability. I thanked the commander again and watched his official sedan pull away. I was finally, truly, alone. # 5.3 The cleanup and the silence, the moment I stepped back inside and locked the newly installed deadbolt. The full scope of the invasion hit me. The smell was the worst part. It wasn't just dust or neglect. It was a layered odor of neglect and cheap living. Stale beer, old tobacco smoke clinging to the curtains, and the cloying, fake sweetness of cheap air fresheners attempting to mask the decay. I stood in the center of the living room, hands on my hips, conducting a mental inventory. This wasn't just a dirty house. It was a violation of my personal standards. The sticky residue on the hardwood floors made my teeth grit. The overflowing ashtrays, still sitting on my coffee table, were monuments to their utter disregard. I changed into old fatigues, tied my hair back, and mobilized. This was a mission, and the objective was purification. I started by throwing open every window, letting the cool Virginia air attempt to scour the interior. The next day was dedicated entirely to purging. I began in the kitchen, scraping dried, unidentified food from the counters and scrubbing the stove, which looked like it hadn't seen a cleaning product in months. Every wipe of the sponge was a deliberate act of reclaiming ownership. I wasn't just cleaning grease. I was scrubbing away the residue of their entitlement. I found evidence of their tenancy everywhere. Cheap plastic toys wedged under the sofa, Mark's greasy tools scattered in the garage, and a stack of overdue bills belonging to Lisa carelessly tossed into a drawer. I meticulously photographed every piece of debris and every sign of damage, adding them to the growing file for the civil suit. The spare bedroom, the one Lisa had illegally rented out, was particularly offensive. It was sparsely furnished, smelling strongly of sweat and cheap cologne. As I stripped the stained mattress cover, I felt a wave of icy fury. Lisa wasn't just squatting. She was running a low-level operation, exploiting my assets for her own gain while I was serving my country. It was while I was cleaning out a dusty, seldom-used nightstand in that spare room that my fingers brushed against something hard wrapped in a sock. I pulled it out. It was a wad of folded bills, secured with a rubber band. I counted it quickly. $700. My heart pounded, not from excitement, but from the cold confirmation of her deceit. This was the illegal rent she had collected, stashed away, likely hidden from Mark as well. It was tangible proof of her criminal intent. I immediately stopped cleaning that section, took a series of high-resolution photographs of the cash bundle, and placed it carefully into a sealed evidence bag. I contacted Commander Hayes' office instantly, feeling a grim satisfaction. This wasn't just hearsay anymore. I had recovered the stolen goods. The legal case just became airtight. I continued the physical labor until my muscles ached, moving systematically through the house. I bagged up all the cheap, mismatched items Lisa had left behind: the broken chairs, the gaudy decorations, the piles of discarded fast food containers, and dragged them out to the curb. The sheer volume of trash was astonishing, a physical manifestation of her chaotic, wasteful existence. By the evening, the house was empty of foreign objects, though the air still felt heavy. I took a scalding shower, washing away the grime and the residue of the past week's trauma. I changed into a simple, clean t-shirt and shorts, and felt the tension finally start to recede from my shoulders. I walked through the rooms, the floorboards now squeaking under my own feet, not theirs. The silence was profound. It was not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of peace, the quiet integrity of walls that belonged only to me. # 5.4 Peace restored. I didn't bother unpacking my duffel bags that night. Instead, I focused on the one room that was truly sanitized, the living room. I sat on my sofa, the one piece of furniture they hadn't completely ruined and simply existed in the quiet space. The darkness outside was absolute, broken only by the soft glow of the street lamp filtering through the cleaned window panes. I listened. I heard the distant hum of traffic, the slight shift of the house settling, the quiet thrumming of the refrigerator. I heard no music, no shouting, no passive-aggressive complaints, just silence. This silence was the victory. I retrieved a glass of tap water from the kitchen. I wasn't ready to open a bottle of anything celebratory. That felt too dramatic. I held the glass up, watching the light refract through the water. 18 months of deployment had been about maintaining order in chaos, relying on procedure, and trusting the hierarchy. When I returned, I found chaos waiting for me on the home front. A betrayal far more personal and painful than anything I had faced overseas. But my training had held. I had met chaos with structure, entitlement with documentation, and emotional manipulation with the cold, hard facts of the law. I had been called a squatter in my own home. I had been called heartless. But those labels meant nothing now. I was the owner. I was the provider. I was the responsible party who had maintained the mortgage, paid the taxes, and now, finally, enforced the boundaries. The battle with Lisa was a necessary, final lesson in self-preservation. Blood ties do not guarantee loyalty, and sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to cut out the source of the infection, no matter how painful the surgery. I recognized that the guilt-tripping family members were not allies. They were enablers, and they too had to be cut loose, at least temporarily, until they recognized the difference between generosity and exploitation. I took a long, slow sip of the water. It tasted clean, cold, and utterly earned. I looked around the empty, clean space. The house was no longer just an investment. It was a sanctuary. It was a physical testament to my dedication and discipline. Every dollar I had paid, every hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made while deployed was reflected in the quiet integrity of these four walls. I lowered the glass, a profound sense of peace settling over me. I was home. Truly home. The mess was external. The legal process was underway. But internally, the storm had passed. I was ready to unpack my bags, change the sheets on my own bed, and start living the quiet life I had fought so hard to protect. Justice wasn't loud. It was the quiet, undeniable truth that I was standing exactly where I belonged.